So these are some frequently asked questions regarding ballot measures that have been proposed by the California State Legislature. Now, the obvious first question is, can the legislature place measures on the ballot? And yes, legislators in California can place measures before the voters at statewide elections. Where is their authority found to do so? Division 9, Chapter 1, Article 4 of the California Elections Code deals with measures that are proposed by the legislature. And what does state law require in this regard? Elections Code Section 9040 requires every constitutional amendment, bond measure, or other legislative measure that's submitted to the people by the legislature to appear on the ballot of the first statewide election occurring at least 131 days after the adoption of the proposal by the legislature. Is there any unique authority for a ballot measures legislative author? Yes, in Elections Code Section 9041, it specifies that whenever the legislature submits any measure to the voters of this state, the author of the legislative measure and no more than two other persons appointed by the legislative author may draft an argument in favor of the adoption of the measure. Now, what happens if a ballot measure is not adopted unanimously by legislators? Then Elections Code Section 9042 specifies that one member of the Senate who voted against the measure is to be appointed by the President pro tempore of the Senate, and one member of the Assembly who voted against the measure is to be appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly, both of which is for the purpose of writing an argument against the legislative measure. And note that this argument against the ballot measure cannot exceed 500 words in length. When must ballot arguments be filed? In Elections Code Section 9043, it specifies that arguments prepared by legislators and their appointees must be submitted to the California Secretary of State no later than a date that's designated by the Secretary of State, and those arguments, when submitted, may not be amended or changed. Now, what happens if a legislator doesn't file an argument for or against a ballot measure that was placed on the ballot by the legislature? Then we turn to Elections Code Section 9044, which provides that if an argument for or an argument against a measure submitted to the voters by the legislature has not been filed by a member of the legislature, then any voter may request the California Secretary of State for her or his permission to prepare and file an argument for either side in favor or against. And what happens if more than one voter requests to submit an argument on a legislative measure? Then, under the Elections Code, the Secretary of State is required to designate one of those voters to write the argument. And any argument prepared must be submitted to the Secretary of State by a date that's sufficient to meet ballot printing deadlines.